Wait for it. Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun and dysfunction. So without further ado, first we're going to let our friend of the show, who's serving as a guest host because she's read these books, the one, the only, the lady of legend, Miss Jana S. Brown.
Woo! Hi guys, I'm Jana S. Brown, and I'm here today because I'm a fangirl. So I'm fangirling over the books, and because there are stacks of these books in my basement, so I am familiar with them on all sorts of levels, including how heavy it is to carry sets of them up and down the stairs. So I'm excited because even though I know the books well, there's questions that I've never asked, and so now I get to get them answered. So I'm excited. It's going to be good.
All right. And then next, since we do have a guest host for this one, I will mention that for a while, you're going to see a stretch where Stabby and Nick are not around. He is working quadruple, I don't know, whatever overtime. I tried to add that math up, and it's got to be government math because, he's Border Patrol, because that adds up more hours there are in a week. I don't know how that works.
Oh, yeah.
But we won't get political, but with the new administration and their increased workload for certain departments, he's just super duper busy.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to do to stay connected with him is we will be doing some short chats where we just what are we reading now? What are we watching? Just, BS chats that take, 15 minutes or so where we just shoot the breeze so you can see that he's still alive. Proof of life is important, I'm told. It's good for morale. So kids don't think mommy and daddy had a fight.
Oh, really?
But yeah, he's working crazy hours. So it might be about a month, I think he said, before things calm down. Although relative to the fact we're recording in March, because I never know when these are going to actually air. Mm-hmm. And with that, we've got our guest, Miss Melissa McShane. If you could introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Oh, of course. I'm Melissa McShane. I have written many, many fantasy books in many fantasy subgenres, including contemporary fantasy and secondary world fantasy and the historical fantasy that we're here to talk about tonight. And I am normally living in India, in Kerala, which is southern India, and we make trips back to the United States every couple of months, and this is one of them. So I'm actually here in the U.S. On a more normal time differential from JR, and normally when we're recording this and on his time, it's like 7:30 in the morning the next day, my time. So this is kind of different and fun that it's the end of my day.
Yeah, you're coming to us from Utah this time, so you're like 2
that
hours
is correct.
earlier.
Right. Uh-huh.
Yep.
So
yeah.
All righty. So because they've been on so often, you've seen their faces on a lot of our panels. Instead of doing our normal religion question, we're going to mix it up just a little bit as a replacement. So what are you reading right now, Melissa?
I am reading This Inevitable Ruin, which is the 7th book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. And this is a fantastically exciting series. It's lit RPG. It's a unbelievably complicated explanation, but basically our planet gets demolished to be a action television live reality show that aliens are watching, and it gets way more complicated than that. And the main character is Carl, and he comes into the dungeon with his pet cat, who is basically uplifted to be intelligent and speaking and is smarter than he is, and her name is Princess Donut. And it's so much fun. I can't even tell you. And if you are interested in the series at all, I highly recommend the audiobooks. My daughter is listening to them, and they do really great audio mixing. They've got some sound effects. It's not a full cast. It's a single narrator for most of them, and he's very talented. But they got Patrick Warburton, who's one of my favorite actors, and oh shoot, am I?
Just a little bit.
Breaking up? Okay, I'll try and be. It's probably the hotel Wi-Fi. Anyway, so they got Patrick Warburton on to do some of the guest voices. And
why do I know that name?
he does everything. He's this really big guy, and he was. Now all I can think of is that he was the Tick in the live action short-lived TV
Yes.
series. And
Okay.
in Emperor's New Groove, the Disney movie, he's Kronk, the
Wrong.
stupid
Oh,
but lovable henchman.
got it.
So anyway, he plays an amazing part that if you read the series, you'll know why that's perfect. But that's what I'm reading now is Dungeon Crawler Carl, and I just finished reading another book called Live, Love, Level by MCA Hogarth, and it is not released yet. I got an advance copy, and it's also sort of game lit. It's about a mother and son who are in a beta for a massively multiplayer online game, and it's funny because it kind of grew on me. I mean, I liked it; it was fine, but after I was finished, I was thinking about it more and more. So that was the other thing I just finished reading a couple days ago. So you get two.
All right. What about you, Jana? What is Jana reading and what is Jenna reading, and are they the same?
Ooh, now see, that's a really good question because the answer is they're not actually the same. So Jana is reading Wit and Wisdom by Craig Martell. It's his bits and pieces about being a writer and about his career as a writer and all those kinds of things. He put it together for Superstars, which is a conference that I was at in February. And so it's just this cute little pamphlet book that it's all writerly wisdom and a lot of rah-rah, you can do it kind of thing, which is really, really nice. So I'm reading that. And then I am reading Knight of Knives by Stephen Erickson. And that is, it's part of the Malazan series, and it is amazing, but it is phenomenally crunchy kind of fantasy where there's a lot going on and there's all these moving pieces and there's gods and there's politics and it is fantasy that I have to read when my brain is really, really functioning well, because it is not lighthearted, easy to read fantasy, which is why Jenna Ray is rereading the Alana Andrews books, the Kate Daniels series, because that is brain popcorn. So I'm like, if I've got the crunchy thing, I need the brain popcorn. So when I cannot read the crunchy stuff, then I'm brain popcorning and rereading old favorites.
Okay, so I'm reading two series at once. So the first one is called the Alpha series by Eric Vall. Not for the faint of heart. If you don't like mature content, it's men's adventure fiction romance is the genre, harem lit. But it's got vampires, and I'm willing to try anything with vampires, even lady smushy like romance style books, romantasy, I guess. I just like werewolves, so if it's got that, I'm willing to give it a shot. I mean, you've already got the buy-in when you've got wolves. With me anyway. But unfortunately, it's $100 to buy the whole series on Amazon for ebooks because there's 18 of them, and he is not in KU. And I'm hesitant with all the drama that's been going on about not actually owning the books I buy. I'm going to try to start looking at non-Amazon purchasing options where I can like actually own the digital copy I download, which also means I probably ought to invest in like a couple terabyte like drive thingy. I don't know. Clearly, I'm the tech guy. But yeah, I'm going to clearly I'm going to start looking at that option. So it's got me kind of thinking about what I'm buying. But and then the print books and the audiobooks are sold either through Audiobook Guild, the audio publisher, or through Eric's website. But I did the math. The first 15 of 18 are out in audiobooks, and to buy the rest of them, it would be like $250 plus tax. And so it's like, I'm going to pace myself on those. And they feel like quick reads.
Have to.
They're quick reads, but they're 9 hours. So that's roughly like 80 to 90K book. So it's not a short book. It just feels short because it's so action centric. I wouldn't listen in front of the kiddos though. And then I am also reading the Last Hunter series by Terry Mixon and Jay and Cheney. They just put out the last audiobook. It's up for pre-order in the 16-book series. And I realized that I'd stopped somewhere along the way because keeping up with Terry Mixon when you do audio gets really expensive. I love his writing. I love his books. But so as I deal with the economic insecurities, I have been reading books I bought but never actually got around to. And so I've got like 5 books in that series already. So I'm going to pace myself on that one too. But that one is everything I loved about Battlestar Galactica, the idea of a museum ship being brought back to life. He's used the same trope that I have, because it's the robots as the uncaring, faceless enemy that you kind of you don't get anything out of them but the relentless horde. I've seen that in a lot of things. We did it with our derelict book with Dave Hensley. I like that trope because it's that for a reason, right? Like, you just can't reason with a machine, and it doesn't communicate. It just comes and kills and kills. So it's like Terminator, but less personality. And so I'm really enjoying those. I just finished, because I started The Last Hunter book 1 today. I just finished his Humanity Unlimited series, which I really dig. Unfortunately, he says it was an ending. I feel like there are way too many plot holes left open in book 4. He needs to come give us like a 5th one to close it all up. I know they didn't really sell. And then right as he published book 4, because post-apocs hit or miss for people. But right as he published book 4, he started writing for Mr. Moneybags. I mean, Jay and Cheney. So his boss keeps him chained to the desk. He's not even allowed to eat sometimes. I feel like we ought to send, like, I don't know, author welfare services or something. But yeah, he's busy writing other stuff. So I don't know that I'll ever get my book 5. So in my imagination, the series continues.
Yeah.
Yep. Sometimes you must have headcanon.
Yes.
I have many series that I'm like, the series stopped midway. I have headcanon for how it finished. It's all right.
And now I'm picturing like one of these like lit RPG, because I've been going down that road reading a lot of lit RPG type books. Some of it's game lit, not all of it's as crunchy. And I'm imagining now someone's head actually morphing into a cannon. So we have head cannon, or maybe like mounting on their helmet or something.
Oh my.
Right up there.
Yeah, you see all the ideas, man. This is not good for my soul. But anyway, so that's what I am reading. All right, so what are you guys watching? We'll start with you, Melissa.
Okay, so we just finished watching my very favorite series, which is a British series called Hustle. It's quite old now. It's almost 20 years old, which is kind of a shocker to me. But it's like Leverage. In fact, I think Leverage was influenced some by Hustle. They're all grifters, and it's a team of grifters in London, and their premise is that you can't cheat an honest man, which is not totally true, because you can, but the kind of cons that they do depend on people being greedy and wanting something for nothing. And so they give nothing for something. And it's 8 seasons long, but they're British seasons, so they're only 6 episodes each. And I have the DVDs, which turns out to be a good thing, because we watched it through Amazon, and Amazon's version is edited. The episodes are missing plot points, and you wouldn't notice it because they still all hang together. But since I've watched it many times, we're watching an episode, and I'm going along and thinking, wait a minute, there was a whole subplot here with their barman and this friend of theirs, and it's gone. It's been edited out.
Wow.
So I don't know what was up with that. I think they edited it for length, so that it would fit more perfectly into an hour-long format. Because I don't know that the British care that much about keeping it to an hour. Anyway, so it's really great. The characters are all exciting and engaging, and they've all got their own stories, and the cons are really interesting. It's something that I am very fond of, is that kind of story. So we just finished the final episode, which my husband had never seen, and so that was really fun to see his reaction. And we just finished that the night before we got on the plane to come here. So that is what I have been watching.
Nice. Before, Jana, if you turn your camera off and you go just with an avatar, it should lower the Wi-Fi requirement and should stop you from roboting. And you can't help it when you're
Is it doing that still?
A little bit.
A little bit.
Turn your camera off, it'll require less bandwidth, and you should be good.
All right.
And now you know what happens behind the scenes, because I forgot to like pause it to edit this out. So we're just gonna rock on. And Jana, what are you watching? And is Jenna Ray watching something else?
Okay, so the watching question always gets me in trouble, because most of the watching on our house is my husband and I are both sports fans. So we watch a lot of sports, and we watch a whole lot of police procedural stuff, and not a lot of like dramas or anything that truly has a storyline. So there you go. But the fun thing we've been rewatching is my husband found a streaming channel that is all classic Doctor Who. So it is Doctor Who from 1 to 6. And so we have been watching classic Doctor Who, a whole lot of Tom Baker, because they don't necessarily play them in order. So you never know what episode you're going to get next. And that's been kind of an interesting blast from the past, because the last time that I saw those was, when I was just a kid. And so we're watching those and laughing at how bad some of the special effects are, but they still tell really solid stories. So when I'm watching something that isn't sports or OP Live, it's Doctor Who.
Okay. So I
Very
am
cool.
watching, we just did a review on it and I got hooked. I'm like 5 episodes into season 1 of Arcane, which is a League of Legends show. I've never played the game, but the
I
series
need
is
to watch
really good.
that.
It's steampunk. The animation is cool. The graphics are awesome. And so like I'm just really, really enjoying it. And so I'm watching that. I am working on working my way through that, and then I've been looking for something else, because I tend to forget halfway through series that I'm watching them, so I really ought to finish some of those ones I started. Like the Night Phone, I think was the name of the series, the Night Phone Operator or something like that, about a CIA guy who mans the phone that you call an emergency in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
They just released the second season because it ended on somewhat of a cliffhanger at the end of season 1. And so like I might go back to that. I've also been rewatching some of the classic movies, because I found, like, time-wise, if I start a series, I'll get sucked in and I might end up watching hours and hours and hours. But if I watch a movie, I can generally stop myself at the end. So I've been working through some of the movies I haven't seen in years and kind of experiencing them with the kiddos. So like we watched what was it? The Roman Legion show with Channing Tatum. What was that called?
Ooh.
Drawing a blank on the name. He was the Last Eagle, I think it was.
Oh, cool.
I'll have to get it and I'll throw it in the show notes. But yeah, I just watched that. I watched 13th Warrior with the boy child. We watched The Lost Legion.
With Antonio Banderas.
Oh yeah, it was called Centurion. Was that one? And then we just watched The Last Legion, and then next on the list is The Eagle, Ator the Fighting Eagle, which is a British one, and then Pathfinder. Pathfinder's kind of cool because the premise of that one is the Vikings come here and they get kind of their butt kicked by the natives, so they leave. And the first group crashes there and they leave. The kid survives. He gets raised by the natives, and then they fight back when he has to choose his family of birth or his family of raising. So
that's fun.
Nice.
It's got some really, it's somewhat violent, but it's also got some wholesome chosen family messages. And sometimes, the family you get born into isn't always the best, but you can always pick better. And while obviously, I think family is everything, so you should strive to make your birth family better. Obviously, that's not always a possibility. So I think it's valid to have chosen family, and I really dig that this series or that movie kind of puts that into production. But yeah, I've been watching a lot of Roman Legion stuff lately. I don't know why.
That's fun.
But I dig the uniforms. At one point in time, my first tattoo was going to be SPQR, but I never did it.
Ooh.
Yeah, now my money goes to things like mortgages and food, and I don't know.
Right.
Now you have to adult.
I know it's not fair. But anyway, so that's that. We are gonna now ask you a really fun question. So, what are you looking forward to either reading because you haven't gotten to it yet, or watching, or one that hasn't come out yet? But what are you looking forward to consuming both in print and screen? So, Melissa.
Oh my gosh. There's no like ongoing series that I'm waiting for the next book in. Mainly because the Dungeon Crawler Carl, that's like a very recent release. And so if I were looking forward to book 8, I'd be waiting a really long time. And that would be frustrating. But, and I think I've mentioned this before, I have a reading project that I'm doing where I'm reading one book published every year for all the years I've been alive. So starting in 1972, I'm reading a book published in 72, and then in 1973 and 1974. And it has to be a book I haven't read before that I own, so that I'm also making a dent in my TBR pile. And I am reading other things as well, so I kind of come back to this project when I'm finished with stuff. And I'm looking forward to reading the next few books in the queue, because they're all speculative fiction, because these are all over the place. This is not just science fiction and fantasy. There's been nonfiction travel books and fiction and contemporary fiction and stuff like that, mystery novels. But the next few are going to be an Andre Norton book set in the witch world, which is I guess it's a collection of short stories. So that's going to be interesting. And then a couple of others that I just had never read before. I'm in 1980 is the year that I've reached in my reading progression. So it's been very successful. The goal was to get me reading again, because I had pretty much stopped reading anything but my own books, and that was very frustrating. So I needed to read some more, and I respond very well to challenges. And so I made this one. This was actually a friend of mine did the same thing, and I got the idea from her. And so I am looking forward to reading more. I've got everything set up. I've got everything picked, and I can look at the list and go, "Oh, I'm really excited. This is the next book." And so I'm looking forward to that. It's got me reading again, and that's really fun. Does the sound okay now?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
it's
good.
a little bit, but it's not as bad. So we'll rock it out.
Okay, good.
Okay. What about you, Jana?
So the thing I'm looking forward to reading, it's not that there's a new out, but it was because I was kind of unaware, is Still on Target from Kevin Eikenberry, which I found out. I was at a conference with him a little bit ago, and he came by my table at one point and he said, "Hey, did you know that I wrote your name as a character into one of my books?" And I went, "You did how, what?" And he says, "Oh yeah, you helped me do a bunch of stuff on Facebook at one point, and so this was my thank you." And I'd completely forgotten about all of this. And this was brilliant marketing on his part, because he stops and he says, "You actually come in on book 3, so you're going to have to get books 1, 2, and 3 in order to see where the character comes in. And I promise she survives book 3, but I can't guarantee about book 4 because it hasn't come out yet." So the man sold me 3 books and a pre-order of 4 on the spot, because I had to have all of the books so that I can read up to when Sergeant Stocks, that's my middle name, it's what the S stands for, when First Class Sergeant Stocks shows up in her power armor. So it was a brilliant stroke of, I mean, he made like $50 that day, because I turned around and went to the bookstore and bought all 3 of the books that I could buy and put together the pre-order for book 4. So that's what I'm going to be jumping into as my next read, because I do love me some good military sci-fi, and I'm in the book, so I have to know what happened, and then I have to get book 4 to find out whether or not I survive. So he got me. It was brilliant marketing. There you go.
We're actually going to be interviewing him coming up in April for those books. So they're put out by Athon.
Awesome.
Yeah, they're put out by Athon. He was a colonel in the Army, if I remember correctly.
Oh, really?
And just the nicest guy. I mean, I've met him several times, and like say Facebook friends, and met him at conferences, and just really, really good guy. And for the parts of the books that I've read, because of course I had to skim forward to go, well, when did she come into the book? It's chapter 11. The parts that I read around that were really, really fun, enough that I went, yep, I do need to get all of them, and I will read all of them, whether or not my character was in it or not, because they're just well written. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, the books that I'm reading now are also the ones I'm looking forward to, because the holdup is my budget. So yeah, I'm working my way through, and I listen while I'm working, while I'm going on my walks. So like an 8-hour book doesn't take me I can finish it in a day or two while I'm getting stuff done. Which means listening is an expensive habit. I really ought to look into that app you can do through the libraries and check out audio.
Libby, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just not the most tech savvy, and every time Apple does an update on the dang phone, it cuts more in my memory. And I had like the largest memory at one point in time you could get, and now suddenly it's not big enough to operate the update. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. At a certain point in time, I'm going to have to carry a brick attached to my phone just to have the memory.
Yeah.
It's getting ridiculous. They got sued because of the planned obsolescence with the battery life.
Oh.
And so they fixed that, but suddenly the updates are just so big. I wonder how much fluff is written into that code to just take memory.
Yeah.
You gotta wonder. It's
Yeah,
kind
I
of a
did
pain.
turn
I
off
do
the
wonder that.
updates, so now I'm not getting any future updates. But that means at some point in time, things won't work like they're supposed to. So I don't know what I'm going to do. But yeah, so I'm working my way through those books. But Libby, yeah, I'll have to check that out. I might bug you later to see how to sign up for those things.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Now, are your guys'
Yeah.
since we're talking Libby, are your guys' books in the library system or no?
Mine are
Mhm.
in okay. Library systems are local, and mine are in the Salt Lake County Library. They may be in other libraries too. I'm not sure, because the other thing about library systems is that their methods for acquiring books are all different, and most libraries have means for readers to request that they buy certain books to have in library catalog, but it's different for everyone. For my home library for Salt Lake County, somebody in the acquisitions department is a fan, and so they just get my books, and I'll go into the library, and they'll be sitting there on the little carousel, and that was kind of fun. But you just have to check what your local library system is, and if there is a book that you want, you look at your library website or talk to a librarian, and they'll tell you how to request the book be purchased.
Yeah, I've got a lot of FaceTime with our local librarians just because they do a lot of programs for the special needs community, and so with my kiddos, and so they're great about that kind of stuff, especially since audiobooks and digital technology has been a great way to get around some people with like reading comprehension issues, dyslexia,
Yes.
because you can highlight what you're doing as you read through it, and that's one way you can get around dyslexia.
Right.
So like, I haven't checked though. None of my books are in the library system. I've donated them, but they go into the need a book, buy a book, or need a book, take a book, leave a book, whatever the borrowing option that's not connected to those, because apparently
that's correct.
Amazon's print on demand quality doesn't meet library standards because it has to be, I think she said it was 10 or 15, I can't remember, but it has to be able to be read X number of times before it wears out for it to be considered a good investment. So they have to have quality.
That's an individual library decision, because my books are only available. I don't have anything through Ingram Spark anymore. So mine are only available in print through Amazon, and that's where our library gets them. So again, the standards and the rules are all going to be different depending on your library system. So so it's good that you have a contact with the librarian, because you're going to want to talk to them. Like you say, donating books that's not how they do acquisitions. It's actually more complicated than that, and there are reasons for all of the things that they do, but not necessarily something that makes sense to just readers, because you would think, well, we could just I'll give you a box of books and that's good because it'll add to your catalog, but it actually ends up being more of a pain for the acquisitions and cataloging if they don't just order them new. It just the way that catalogs are updated.
Okay, that's all new to me, but I will take it.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is, most people don't know this, because I was a history major, so I spent lots of time in college in libraries. Librarians can sometimes get very bored, and people don't take advantage of libraries as much as they used to. So if you just go up and talk to them, even if they don't have anything to help you with, they're just thrilled to talk about books to people, because I have yet to meet a librarian that isn't a book nerd.
Right.
And so they'll get all kinds of weird with you about all the niche, you might have even heard of genres that you didn't know existed, talking to them, because they know all the book things.
Yeah.
So Anyway, all right. So with that out of the way, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly show for the man, and then we're going to jump right into talking about Melissa's books.
Here comes your next romp in the graveyard. In Hunters for Hire, a new urban fantasy adventure by best-selling author Jonathan Yanez, a guy down on his luck puts sign twirling and rideshare driving on the back burner to track down the supernatural for a pretty penny. Find out what happens when John Hunter enters the secret underworld. Download your copy and start listening today. Now available on Amazon and Audible.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So first, before we talk about, we're going to talk about the Extraordinaries, which is Extraordinaries, which is the name of the series. For those, before we even get started, what would you say the age range, the rating of this series would be?
Okay, this is a PG-13 series. I think I usually recommend my books for 16 and up simply because what I write about is it's not about the content. It's not anything that I think would be disturbing to a younger reader, but much of what goes on is of interest to older readers. It's like, if you're writing about taxes or something, a little kid is not going to care about that. Of course, probably nobody is, so I usually say I recommend for 16 and up, or for 14 and up if you've got a parent who's willing to like bounce off, or if you're a really precocious reader at 14. I don't think there's anything inappropriate in this series. It's definitely PG-13 rated.
Okay. So with that out of the way, could you give us a basic premise of the series?
Okay. This is alternate history fantasy, historical fantasy, and it is set during the Napoleonic Wars in a world where about 150 years before that point, something happened to trigger a mutation in some humans. And these are, they call it talent, and it's magical abilities, technically psionic abilities, but this is pre-superhero, pre-modern era, and so they don't understand that concept, and so they think of it as magic. And what it means is that there are 8 different magical talents, and some people are born with the ability to control fire or the ability to teleport. There are, lots of different talents. And then the extraordinaries are the ones who have a little bit more. So someone who is telekinetic as an extraordinary would also be able to fly. And someone who has pyrokinetic abilities would be able to shape and extinguish and even handle fire, where an ordinary, they call them scorchers, an ordinary scorcher can start fires, but they can't control them. And so the extraordinaries, that's what the English talents are called. This is set in England, and it's during, as I said, during the Napoleonic Wars, and you've got people fighting these battles using magic. And the fundamental premise here is that the reason Napoleon is so successful and so charismatic is that he is telepathic. He is able to control the emotions of others. And so with that comes a measure of mind control. And so he has gone over Europe, basically enslaving people, and the ones who are still free are fighting back. And that's pretty much the premise. It's I sometimes summarize it as X-Men fighting the Napoleonic Wars, which is reductive but close enough.
So with that, before we dive in deeper, so which power of the ones you have in this book would you want?
Okay, I used to think, and the reason that the first book is Burning Bright about the pyrokinetic is that I have always been fascinated by pyrokinesis, and I always wanted to have that power. That was, being able to control fire. And so I would have said that back 12 years ago when I first started writing this series. But the older I get and the more I see, more potential I see, I think I would want telekinesis. I look at the things. I'm not very tall, and I have short, stubby arms, and it would be great to be able to reach stuff off the upper shelves, especially in my India house, which is everything is really high up, which is weird because most Indians are not that tall. And so I don't know who they were building the house for, but my house has these 10-foot tall ceilings and cupboards that go all the way up, and you can't reach them without a ladder. So yeah, telekinesis is what I would want.
So first off, ceilings are built high like that, so air will circulate, and it allows things to naturally cool a building where you don't have central air.
Right, but it's the cupboards that go all the way to the ceiling that I am interested in. That, because the ceilings, the heights make sense, and we've got fans and we've got the movement, and it works really well. But if you can't reach the cupboard, why is it there? So I am never sure what well, my house has a lot of issues, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So, so there you go.
What about you, Jana? Which one will you pick?
Oh, of the ones that she has there. See, now it got hard, because I do agree that the Scorcher is fun because it's so dramatic, but some of the others I think would be more useful in a day-to-day fashion. And as Melissa says, as I've grown up, I found that I want things that are more day-to-day useful versus something that's flashy, because now I'm old, and so things like to be able to telekinesis something down to me so that I don't have to worry about it. Though I do really love the idea of bounding, of being able to teleport, because then I could just go and visit people that I want to visit without having to sit in a car. So that probably would actually be my favorite, would be the ability to be able to say, yes, I'm going to go down and I'm going to visit my in-laws that live on a ranch in Arizona, and instead of driving in a car for 10 hours, I can just bound there and ta-da, I'm there. So I think it might have to be teleporting.
Yeah, that's what I would have picked based on what she said. Teleporting sounds fun. Yeah. Can they take people with them, or is it just them?
Yes, they can. They can take anything they can lift. So bounders. So okay, so basically in this series, I gave well, how do I start? Okay. In the series, I picked 8 magical or psionic talents that I thought would be interesting. 4 of them are physical, 4 of them are mental. And they've got Greek names. So you've got things like telepathy and telekinesis and so forth. But the common term is speaker, mover, bounder, scorcher. They've all got names like that. And shoot, I forgot where I was going with that. What did you ask?
So what could they take them with them? And you were talking about
right. We were talking about bounders. That's it. Okay, yes, so bounders are all really strong because they lift, and they have to be able to carry heavy loads if they're going to be able to teleport somewhere. So there's an upper limit to what can be teleported because they can't work in pairs. It's all individual.
Okay.
So if you're going to be carrying somebody, you have to be strong enough to manage that person. And in the second book, when we introduce Lady Daphne, who is a bounder, and she is 5 feet
adorable
tall and just, a talker. The next one. That one. Okay. She looks taller in this than she really is, but she's only about 4 feet tall, and she has wanted to be a bounder serving under Lord Wellington for her whole life. And so she has practiced, and she lifts weights, and she practices lifting increasingly heavy weights so that she can carry a full-grown man if she has to. So you can take one person, although memorably in the book, she manages to bound with 2 people at once, because all she has to do is be able to lift them for the moment that she transits between locations. And so she's like the first person who's ever transported 2 people at a time. And but that's the limitation on teleportation. You have to be able to carry. You have to be able to hold. You can't just touch it. Touching it is not enough.
So what if they jump at you and you've bound the minute they're touching you and hugging you, so you're technically holding them even if you couldn't sustain it? Would that still work?
That would still work, because if you can, all you have to do is to be able to support them for a short period of time. And if you've got somebody who's like leaping at you and wants to be caught, then that would work. But mostly it's what you can lift. Sometimes, and that each book has a different talent, and each book has me exploring my thoughts about, well, okay, how could you lift, and how could you keep a bounder imprisoned, and what would you do to keep them from bounding away, and how heavy is a full grown man typically, and things like bounders who build harnesses so they can carry loads. Mostly the bounders are used as couriers, and so they like have a harness that's got like a backpack and a chest pack and stuff like that, so they just load themselves up and then they go.
Take that, Pony
Well, and
Express.
Yeah.
and you did something interesting with also um, the way that the genders work in this war, because you have extraordinary women, and I remember this with the bounders, that there were arguments over wearing dresses or not, because
Mm-hmm.
if you're bounding, and bounding can be, it has different things, but there's a skipping they do where they're just skipping to the next point that they can see, so they kind of hop across the sky, which was a visual that I always loved. But how you
Mm-hmm.
were addressing, you can't do that in a dress without flashing everybody your underwear.
Oh,
And
they wouldn't
so,
have underwear. They didn't wear underwear at that time,
yes,
so it would be even worse than that.
exactly. So, but I liked that this is another aspect that you bring in, is women in war in that historical time. So what went into
Mm-hmm.
figuring out where those lines were going to be, where you kept with what was very traditional roles, and where you adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
How did some of that thought process come about? Because it happens in all of the books, where you're having to look at what's their position in society, what do their talents mean, and how does that
Mm-hmm.
rub against what would have been historically accurate?
Well, some of that came from what I knew about post World War II and women wanting to stay in the workforce, rather than having to return home when all the men came back and wanted their jobs back. And so I started from the premise that we're in an unusual time here, where England cannot afford to not use someone just because she's a woman. They've got women who are, because for the most part the talent has nothing to do with whether you're male or female, for how good you're going to be at it, and so they can't afford to shun someone, and so they've got all these women who are taking on these roles. But for the movers, for example, the extraordinary movers are the ones who can fly, and it's the same thing with the women. They have these traditional outfits that they wear, these really thick, heavy divided skirts, so that it looks like their legs are concealed. And that becomes a plot point in book 7, which is about the extraordinary mover. And the same thing happens with the bounders too. Yeah, see, even my artist, I have been gradually getting these all recovered. So the final book is the only one not by Amalia Chiricea, and I'm probably slaughtering her name, but she did the first cover for Burning Bright back when it was published through Curiosity Quills Press. And when I got the rights back and continued publishing the series, I went to her and I said, "Can you, do some of these others? Can you continue what you were doing?" And so she did, and it's been kind of a mix-up, because we had book 1 by one artist, books 2 and 3 by a second artist. This is now her recover. Those are all Amalia's work, and then book 4 is hers, and like I said, all the way through to the end, are all her work. And it has been really refreshing to work with her, because she gets the vision and she's very quick, and and is good at the detail.
Ooh, this is killing me, Melissa.
Yeah,
She's
I know.
got
I'm
it.
sorry. I couldn't get it. I couldn't get it to go the other way. Well, okay. Originally, it was upside down. So
Well,
the
it's possible that just angles that her hand is just below the lip of the barrel and she's
it
good.
is.
So I'm going to give it the benefit of the
It
doubt,
is.
but
That's
Yes.
what I do. Yeah, that's what I do. It's not, she's not got her hand over the top of the barrel. She's just gripping it.
'Cause she's
But
smart enough
yeah,
not to do that.
originally she had I told her, this is what I want. I had my daughter mock up the pose that you see here with a broom. And I said, okay. And so she's holding the rifle. And I get back the first one and the rifle is upside down. And I said, no, that's not going to work. And so this is what she came up with later. And I'm so assuming that she's not got her hand over the top of it. I'm very satisfied with how that turned out.
some of the minor
She
details are
does.
right, though, like the scope that you can see
Uh-huh.
just behind the G in the
Uh-huh.
N.
That's well,
period.
I sent her pictures of Baker rifles.
Yeah,
And
the pistol, like the metal mounting for the trigger guard is off a little bit,
mhm.
but I mean, you could always argue that was a repair job, and when you do repairs on the field, they don't always look like they came out of the factory.
Right. Yeah. And this is, I mean, this character is the top rifleman in her unit, and I like to think of her being very concerned about making her, keeping good care of her rifle. But it's like you say, you just you take what you can get sometimes, and this is set, book 6 here is set right at Waterloo, and so just after they got that fresh, everybody's now got uniforms and boots, which they didn't have for a while, and but she's got her old rifle.
Yeah, and that's one of the things where when you're talking about that, like when people do rifles or have weapons on the cover and their fingers in the trigger and they're pointing at their friends or hands
Yeah.
over the barrel, like there are some that are more egregious than others that you can't forgive. But this one is, I can see it go either way. But I've also seen historic pictures where people are posing with weapons in a way that would make OSHA cringe in modern times.
Yeah.
It definitely follows zero rules of gun safety.
Yeah.
And so, like, when you're talking historically, you can cut it a little slack, because I have seen pictures where people's hands are over the barrel. They felt a little safer because the weapons were longer, so the chance of accidentally pulling the trigger on yourself were smaller, not zero,
That's
smaller.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Not zero. Yep. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, back to Jana's question, this has always been an issue of what are women capable of doing? And one of the things that interests me in writing is writing about powerful women who aren't necessarily fighting against oppression and misunderstanding and stuff like that. Because I think that's an easy out, because we respond to that. We respond to injustice as readers. And so it is a really easy sell to have a woman who is unjustly persecuted. Even though she's really good, she's not given her chance. And I like that story, but I feel like there's plenty of it, and not nearly so much of the, well, here's how a woman relates to the world when she's given respect. And in this series, it's not perfect. You still have people who, men and women, who are trying to control these women, these main characters. In this one that you're showing here, Soaring Flight, one of the chief perpetrators of keeping the women down is another woman who wants to see women be modest, and she hates the idea of women flying in trousers, and she thinks that they should all behave themselves. And this, she's especially interested in Clemency here on the cover, because Clemency is a countess, and and has that title in her own right, not through marriage. And so she's always going on about how Clemency should set an example. And Clemency comes to the decision that she's setting an example by being strong and confident, and that whether she wears a skirt or trousers has nothing to do with it. So it comes down to, what are women capable of doing, regardless of what the world around them is saying.
Okay. So that's the premise of the series. How did you come up with the concept that became the Extraordinaries as a series?
Okay. Well, it starts back about 30 years when I came up with a concept for a series about superheroes. And so I was developing my ideas about these psionic abilities. What would be the limitations? What could you do with them? And it never went anywhere because I wasn't a writer for a long time. Well, I wasn't a writer of fiction for a long time. And it was just something that I played with there we've got Liberating Fight is our biokinetic shaper, able to manipulate her own body and other people's. And so I would, what does that mean? What can she change in other people? And what's the limitation? Well, she has to be able to touch their skin, and she can stop their heart, or she could start it again. And so it went on like that. There were just all these ideas I had that were mostly just for fun. And then back in, I'm going to say 2014, we were talking, my husband and I were talking about what I was going to write next. And he said, well, you like Regency stuff. Why don't you write a Regency fantasy? And I really only knew about Regency romance at the time. There wasn't Naomi Novik and I don't know, I could be wrong, but I hadn't read Naomi Novik's Temeraire series, so I didn't know anything about it. And I said, well, I don't want to write a romance. And he said, well, just, write a fantasy. And when he came up with it, so it was kind of a challenge to see whether I could do that. And when he came up with that, I thought, well, I have this magic system that is doing nothing. I wonder if I could use that as a framework for magical people during the early 1800s. And so I came up with that, fit that into the world, and came up with a reason for why, there's like a plague or something. I didn't put a lot of effort into that because it didn't really matter. Just that, it was lampshading. But then my husband's like, yeah, well, that the pyrokinetic has to be your first one because you love pyrokinesis. And I said, yes, that's true. And so we came up with this idea of this woman who is the first extraordinary scorcher in England's history in over 100 years. And the thing about scorchers is that because they manifest their talent by setting things on fire, about 80% of them die at manifestation because they do it, their kids. Generally, you manifest talent when you're a teenager, and they'll set their room on fire and they just, burns them to death. And so she does that. She lights her room on fire and wakes up and extinguishes it with her thoughts. And her father sees her as a pawn. He's going to marry her off to someone that he's very interested in the history of talent in England, and he's got this breeding book, and so he's going to make her, he's going to marry her off to somebody who will make great babies, I guess. And rather than do that, she runs off and joins the Royal Navy. And I resurrected the tradition of pirates. This is actually too late for the great days of piracy in the Caribbean, but we had pirates that they were fighting that were preying on England's shipping lanes and destroying ships and making it very difficult. Their attention was split because they're trying to fight Napoleon on one hand, and then they've got all these pirates on the other hand. And so she is sent on a ship to the Caribbean to use her talent to fight pirates. And she was originally going to be in the army, but then I figured that, sending someone who's pyrokinetic to sea on a big wooden ship is probably scary, and it would be interesting to see what happens. So that was how it started, and that's where the first book came to be. And then there were 8 talents, and so there are 8 books.
So does that mean the series is finished, or are you going to do another batch of
Yeah.
8?
I have some ideas for a sequel series, but I'm writing so many other things that's kind of low down on the list.
Okay.
But the series sets up an intelligence agency that's sort of in the background and hires people who are talented to work secretly, covertly. And I would kind of like to explore that. The series ends in 1816, which is right on the verge of the modern era, and superheroes are a very modern conception. So it would be interesting to me to write this series, this sequel series, as an exploration of the world changing and the development of superheroes.
So does each novel stand alone and then
Yeah.
just ties into a larger plot, or does one
Yeah.
follow the other? Because it looks like you got different main characters.
Yes, they're all different main characters. After the first one, I started the tradition of introducing the hero of the next book in the current books. So Wandering Sight is about Sophia, who is a seer. She sees the future and has psychometric abilities. And her cousin, Lady Daphne, is the hero of Abounding Might, and she's a bounder. And then in Abounding Might, she meets Bess, who is the main character of Whispering Twilight. Bess is shipwrecked in Peru, where she meets Amaya, who is an extraordinary shaper in Liberating Fight. And in Liberating Fight, they encounter a coercer. Napoleon is a coercer. So this is a woman who is able to manipulate other people's emotions. And so she's the gun-wielding lady in Beguiling Birthright. And she encounters the main character of the next book. And then the main character of the final book is Clemency there, her like sister-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all linked. And earlier characters like Eleanor is the main character of the first book, and she shows up in several of the later books. And so
and they're following the
kinda get to know each
historical
other.
timeline. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
So
Mhm.
I think from a reader's point of view, it makes a lot more sense if you read them in the publishing order,
Mhm.
because if you jumped to Discerning Insight, there's a lot of information of what happened before that would be, I think it'd be
Mhm.
difficult to entirely understand what was going on. You could probably make it through most of it,
Mhm.
but it's going to make a lot more sense if you start at the beginning
Yeah.
and go through
Mhm.
that direction. And it's exciting that way because you get to see how it builds up. You can see how it's going against the historical, the history of the war, leading up to Waterloo, dealing with Napoleon, and then the fallout of all those things. So
Mhm.
that's the way that
Yeah.
I would have. So I do have a question though. You got 8
Mhm.
here. Were there any powers that you considered and went, "Oh, this would be really, really cool, but I'm not interested enough"? What are the powers that got cut?
Okay. The powers that got cut were cut very early, like pre-Extraordinaries. So back when I was messing around with this psionic setup for superheroes, there were powers that I just wasn't as interested in, like invisibility or X-ray vision or things like that. I don't remember now because it was so long ago that I don't remember what about the ones that I did use. I don't remember what was compelling to me about a lot of them. Some of them are just like you have to have telepathy. And in my original conception, the telepathy was kind of boring because to me it was like the ground state, everybody has telepathy, that's not interesting. And it took some intervention by my beta reader slash content expert slash really patient insightful reader person to say, you know what, this is actually kind of clever. So what I wanted were things that had deep potential for multiple things. So for example, if it was something I was going to include, it had to be something that had an extra that could be an extraordinary talent. So for the prophet, for the seer, in Wandering Sight, the extraordinary seer is has psychometry, so she can touch an object and see its past and present and future, and that's why she's wearing red gloves in the series, because that's if you just go around touching things all the time, you'd be overwhelmed, and it has to be skin to skin contact. So most of these were all things that were just deep, that you're a bounder, you can teleport. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean you can teleport as far as you can see? Does that mean how would you teleport to a place you'd never seen before? So that's kind of where the line was drawn, was what can I make interesting about this?
Mm-hmm.
So you said the lady that can touch things and see its past, present, and future. And then you said skin to skin. So does that mean she can only see that about other people, or can it be skin?
No, that was just me misspeaking. It was okay. She has to have her skin touching whatever the object is, so she can't see about people. Although that would be a really clever idea to, it'd be very confusing, with your boyfriend. But yeah,
we could do that.
Could get you in so much trouble.
Yeah, that could be a problem.
Are these an audiobook?
The first 3 are, yes. And if I ever get my earnings back to where I'd like them to be, then I will continue making audio. I was going to say it's currently on sale, but by the time this airs, the sale will be over for the first one. So,
but the ebook will be on sale, right?
The ebook will be on sale as this airs for Burning Bright.
Okay. So obviously when you talk alternative history, like once you change one thing, you can start to see ripple effects that change all things until it stops being recognizable as with its ties to modernity. So obviously historically slavery was a thing. Now, one of the ways that happened was because they weren't as advanced technologically when they were going into Africa to enslave these individuals. When you start throwing in powers like the ordinaries and the extraordinaries have, it makes it harder to enslave someone who can incinerate you.
Yes, it does.
So does that mean you ended slavery because the powers came to be, or maybe it happened before it ever became a thing?
Well, you've touched on something that is kind of a tricky subject. One of the things I observed as I was doing research for setting this up is that coincidentally, there was a pandemic in 1666, 1667, and I used that as the foundation for, people got sick and some of them recovered and were changed. And one of the things I observed is that coincidentally, the only places that were not touched by that plague were the places that in Africa and in the New World. So the coincidence is that those are also the places where the populace was enslaved or oppressed or whatever. And I decided that I would not make it the case that no talent emerged in those populations, because it seemed to me that could be easily misunderstood as me making a statement about what I thought about Africans or Native Americans. So
there-
it was something that I avoided. But
So
what it
there-
means,
I say, well, the easy out is if a virus caused this mutation, that means at some point in time, those that survive, be they ordinaries, extraordinaries, or normals, they still have that trait within them, which means once they encounter the new world, the plague would start for them too, and you would end up with the same effect upon contact.
Yeah, that's effectively what happens. Is in Burning Bright, we brush up against slavery because it is the Caribbean, and there are plenty of slaves. So slavery is still an issue, but it's mainly because the people who don't have talent are enslaved by the ones who do. So for example, any African, anyone from an African nation who was enslaved is probably enslaved because there were people who had talent who could impose that. Because it's like you say, if you've got somebody who can burn you alive, it's pretty hard to make them a slave. But I don't go into a lot of detail on the slavery because it is such a big thing, and I didn't want the story to be overwhelmed or become a referendum on slavery. So it's mentioned in the first book, and it's mentioned in the last book, where they finally come to the United States. Well, America, it's not the United States, because they lost the Revolutionary War.
All right, we're going to take the American part away.
Yeah. I felt so guilty writing that book. I can't tell you. It was the weirdest feeling, because I didn't think it was going to be a big deal, but I'm all, because I'd made that, I'd established that back in the first book. I just thought, well, okay, that'd be kind of fun. What if we lost the Revolutionary War? And then I just went on my merry way, because they weren't in America. They didn't have to deal with it. They just would mention now and then, oh, so-and-so bounded over to the New World this afternoon, and he's coming back later. And so I just ignored it. But I thought, and then I got to the eighth book and thought, well, this would be kind of fun that we could actually talk about what I thought, because I had come up with some ideas for alternate history, not very many, but things that I wanted to explore. And I started writing the book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like such a traitor. What am I doing? This is awful. And so I had to kind of work it around to where England's approach to its former colonies is very different from the way it actually played out in history. Kind of the same as Abounding Might is set in India, and I had to really soften the East India Company to make that work. So there's always a historical note at the end of each of the books talking about where I made changes and why I made changes.
Oh, that's cool.
And but yeah, writing the eighth book, writing Discerning Insight, and having it be some, British chick in the American colonies, and the colonies lost the war, and they're, still sore about it. But yeah, that felt really weird. It felt
Martha,
really weird.
get my musket. All right, so what I need you to do is, when this podcast ends, I need you to dump some tea into the harbor.
Okay.
Say 10 Hail George Washingtons, and all can be forgiven.
Okay.
There is a way out.
Yeah.
So, wow. So that makes the American Civil, well, there's no American Civil War if there's no America.
Well, there would not be an American Civil War, because in my history, one of the conditions for Britain to let go of the colonies is abolishing slavery. And they, like I said, it's a very general, no deep dive into history, but basically the premise that you had southern states that were very dependent on slavery and did not want to move to a different model. And so in my history, the British are all like, yeah, we want you to be independent, but you got to give this up. And so the Civil War gets subsumed into this larger conflict of, will they or won't they become an independent nation? So there would not be a civil war. And it's like you were saying, you make these changes, and they start to propagate, and all of a sudden you've reached a point that is no longer recognizable as our history. And I don't know, it's interesting to me. I don't think, if I were ever to write this sequel series, I don't think I could come back to the United States, to America, for any of the I could probably have characters who were Americans coming over to England and being agents there, but I think it would be too difficult to justify writing this history based on the changes that I've made. It would just be, I might as well be writing science fiction and completely altering the future.
Well, so once you start changing history, you start changing national culture,
Right.
and your history shapes the kind of nation you became.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, at a certain point in time, it doesn't even look recognizable.
Right. Yeah,
And
exactly.
you could play with it and say, what would that culture develop into? But
Mhm.
at that point, like you said, you might as well be writing about an alien planet
Yeah.
with some names that look familiar. So that's interesting. I'm definitely curious. Hopefully you get back to those audiobooks, because that's kind of how I do my reading. This definitely sounds interesting. Is this heavier on the romance or heavier on the
anyway, that's why I don't want to come back to it, because I don't know what the national culture would look like for the United States if there was no United States and no Civil War, and I kind of don't want to mess with that. It's
No,
not something
absolutely.
I want to speculate about. So I think that's why I would avoid it.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I'm curious. Are you as a book? Is this like a romance that has a
Did we lose
plot,
JR?
or can you hear me?
He's there. Uh-oh, are we losing Melissa?
We might have lost.
I can hear you, JR.
So is this? You can answer for her right now, because you've read all the books. Is this a romance that happens to have the other plot, or the other plot that happens to have the romance? Like, which is the predominant?
Oh, they are really, really well intertwined. I don't think that you could remove either one and have it stand. Uh-oh, Melissa has lost being able to hear any of us. Well, therefore, I can say all sorts of things that I want to. Each one of them does have a romance in it, and I find them, as both a romance reader and a fantasy reader, I find it very, very satisfying where that romance connects with the plot. And she's got some real heartthrobs in here. Miles, who is the captain of the Athena, which is burning bright with number one, is he is just a very, very sweet man, and we like him very much. But I can say that for almost all of the male leads, and that's something that's interesting she's done, is that she talks about how, she's interested in seeing what these powerful women can do, but she does it in a way that the men in their lives and the men around them are still every bit as important, every bit as powerful, every bit as influential. And so they're real partnerships that she's working through for how they work together, how that influences each other, and how the romances evolve from there. So they do have a strong romantic subplot. I would say they're probably still historical fantasies with a strong romance, not romanticises or historical romanticises, however you would call that. But the romance is definitely important, and it's definitely awesome.
No, I would agree with that.
Okay. So for the romance, you did say PG-13. Does that mean it fades to black
Yes.
as far as the?
It's even better than that, because for most of these, they don't actually get to, well, okay, they're all married, for one thing, and for most of them, they get to the romantic scene, and it's like the last scene of the book. So, not just fade to black, but fade to final, back cover. But yeah, this is not spicy romance at all.
No, but it's emotional romance in some of those scenes, because there's some beautiful things that happen. The end of Whispering Twilight, as far as the romance goes, is one of my very, very favorite. And I won't spoil it, but I will just say Bess has problems with her eyes. And I love that Melissa looked into this, because very often when we have fantasy, when we have all that kind of thing, we always assume that, well, people have normal glasses, we have ways to, contacts, ways to deal with vision problems, and that wasn't always the case. And Bess has to deal with what happens when you are severely nearsighted. And so the romance and how her romantic interest helps her through some of that, and the way that he steps in is just so very, very sweet. And their ending scene always makes me just go, oh, they're so cute. So it's very satisfying.
Yeah, and that one in particular was where my because I have a friend and another writer. She's an amazing writer, and she's a subject matter expert. She knows way more about history than I will ever know, and she agreed to read and comment on Burning Bright, and then continued to do that for each of the books in the series. And when it came to Whispering Twilight, it turns out that she too has severe vision problems and vision impairment. And so she would call me on stuff and say, all right, now you said this, but given what you've said about her vision, this is not how it would look. And so, the great thing about writing historical fantasy is when you get people who know what's up with the era, who can make it better, who can make it more interesting, more powerful. And so she was really helpful with that, in addition to all the other wonderful things she did to make the series better.
She
So
said
yeah,
she's an author. Can you tell us who she is? And I'll link to her in the show notes.
yes, her name is Sherwood Smith, and she writes some amazing epic fantasy, and has written for decades in the same world, and it's all linked, and really amazing. She has recently been re-releasing and releasing new books independently, which is great. So I get all her books, and she is generous enough to read mine, and very, very lovely lady.
Okay. Is there anything that I feel like we've gone all over, shy of starting to give spoilers? Is there anything about this series that you feel like you need to add before we wrap this up?
I think just to go back to what I was saying before about wanting to write about women who aren't necessarily oppressed by society. I think that some of these women are that they've all got different reasons for struggling with their talent, for dealing with what they have to do. You've got Eleanor in Burning Bright, who is trying to find her place in the world away from this horrible father. But then you go to Wandering Sight, where Sophia is at the top of her game. She is famous. She is adored, and something happens that makes her lose a lot of the benefits that she's had before, and so she's fighting herself as opposed to fighting the oppression of society, because society thinks she's fantastic and gives her accolades that mostly only go to titled men and women, and she doesn't have a title. She's just this person, this seer. And so I think what I'd like readers to take away from these books is the different ways that women are powerful, and as Jana was saying, that the men in their lives don't have to be overshadowed by them. So it's not just about the women, it's about the partnerships they make. And that's what interests me when I'm writing. That's what I care about, is seeing how people interact with each other, and what it means to be really a strong woman without being a girl boss, or being mean and nasty. How do you do that? How do you be feminine, be a woman, and still be strong. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where I would go with that.
Yeah, so much like you see people that try to describe, quote, alpha men, and they basically make them toxic and abusive in fiction. And I don't even think they're doing it intentionally. You see the same
No, I
thing
think you're
with
right.
some of the way people write girl bosses, and it's like suddenly they're catty and mean
Mhm.
girl-esque instead of just normal. So I like that you kind of address that. So from a mental health angle, because I'm just thinking, going back to the pyromancer or pyrokinesis, excuse me,
Mhm.
if your first opening of your power is burning the world down around you, be it, you die, obviously it's over, but assuming you even manage to get out, the odds are, your house in that era isn't, you didn't have a firefighter you could call 911 to get, right? Presumably magical fire is going to be a little bit stronger even, and not necessarily so, but I imagine there's some trauma from that coming of age experience with these powers that they would have to deal with that could be interesting to play with too. Because
Yeah.
if you're a bounder and you accidentally wake up and you're like at the lion's pit at the zoo because you like to go to the zoo as a kid, and suddenly you're in the bars with it or something. I could see all kinds of ways that could go wrong on the first try.
Yeah. Yeah, they teach the bounders that one of the things that bounders tell each other horror stories about colliding in midair and like being melded together. That can't
But
actually happen, but it's the sort of thing they like to, whisper about.
but they have to know they're a bounder first. So that means there's that still
Right.
that, and obviously all of this is available. Like everybody knows about all the powers, but if you don't think you have the powers, you might not pay that much attention. Oh, sure, they exist, but
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I could see some angles for that could be interesting.
Yeah. Well, and in the first book, we meet another extraordinary Scorcher who's insane because of that, because of how his power manifested, and he is a crazy person. And so, yeah, there's some of that.
Well, and it's what's wrong with King George is tied to
Right. He's an
all of this too.
extraordinary discerner, which means he feels the emotions of everyone around him and can't differentiate those from himself. And he just goes crazy.
Interesting. So, Jana, one of the reasons I brought you on to co-host, because I've done plenty of solo interviews with a guest, it's because you're a super fan of these books. So, given that I brought you here for that reason, are there any questions you want to ask the author since we've got you here?
I think I've asked most of them because I was really curious about, okay, so which one was your favorite? I know you love them all, but which one was the one that you just wrote it and you went, okay, this was, the one that came together quickly and it went, mostly the way you thought it would. If you had to choose one favorite amongst your 8 children here, which would be the secret favorite?
Oh, I think Burning Bright is definitely the favorite. It was a terrific challenge to write. I would write, I must have 5 or 6 outlines because this was my 7th book. And I was outlining very heavily at the time, and it helped me keep the story straight. But it was more like writing down, okay, this is what's going to happen, and I know the story. I know what direction it needs to take. I need to outline this so I won't forget. And so I must have a 5 or 6 outlines, and I would write up until the point that I didn't know something about naval history, and then I would stop and I would research for a couple of days, and then I would go back to writing again. And it went really fast. It was engaging. It was a fun challenge to write a slow burn romance. The research is fascinating. I remember one point where I needed to know who was First Lord of the Admiralty in March of 1812. And this was a while back, so I couldn't ask AI. I did all sorts of, I don't remember how, hours and hours of trying to find this out. And I finally found it and I wrote it down. And then like the next day I was doing something else, reading in a different book. And there was a list of all the First Lords of the Admiralty in order with the dates that they were the First Lord. And it was just sitting there in the book. And it was, I remember that because it was like, why does research have to work out like this? And but what I was learning was fascinating. There was a book, if you've ever read the Master and Commander series, there's a book called Patrick O'Brien's Navy that is this amazing guide to naval history and what it was like to be in the Navy at the time. So it had things like what the different bells meant, and oh, I forget what else. There were a lot of little details that went into Burning Bright. So when I handed it over to Sherwood, and she said, "Yeah, this is really great. You did it." I felt just amazing, that I had managed to pull this together. And so I still look back on this experience. So this is my favorite of the series, but it's also one of the favorite of all the books I've ever written for that reason.
I can see that. That's the danger with anything that requires research, because for me, research is fun, and I would fall down rabbit holes and never get it. You might not see me for 10 years if you give me the right thing to research, because I'll just be having fun.
Yeah. Well, I had the advantage of being really driven to write the book, and so it kept my research. So I would research for like 2 or 3 days, and the pressure to write would be building up all that time. And so I would get to the end of that, and I'm like, I'm not done researching, but I have to go back and write now. And so I would write, and then the pressure to do the research would build up. And so I was kind of going back and forth the whole time. And that was probably ideal, because it's like you say, you fall down a rabbit hole, because the research is just fascinating, the stuff that you learn. And this is a period of history that has always interested me, but not necessarily on this side. I didn't really know very much about the British military, the Navy or the Army. And so that was really fun. Really fun.
So did you stick to like one of the things we'll go, the modern people talk about the Revolutionary War, for instance, because that's what I got my master's in. They always say old and pale, or whatever the insult of the day is. They don't realize how young most of those people were. John Adams was considered the old guy because he was like early 40s.
Yeah.
Like everybody that you see as names, of course, you look at their picture, they're old because it was taken when they were old. But when they were actually doing these great deeds, they were in their 20s. Some of them not even 20 yet. They were 18, 19.
They were kids.
Yeah, I saw a list of the ages of the different founding fathers at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and most of them are in their 20s.
And that's true in Europe too, for this same era. That's the one thing movies get wrong, is the age. Obviously, movies do it because actors, right? And they're laws about child actors, anyone under 18. But like most of the people doing the fighting are going to be relatively young. Now, there are some exceptions, because if you go by the era where there were professional soldiers that essentially get shanghaied and then in for life kind of thing.
Right.
But still, there are going to be a lot more younger people than one would think, because the older you get, the more likely you are to suffer an injury, be it just a wagon rollover or whatever, something that's going to sideline you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just don't want to anymore, because you get old and cranky, and it hurts when you bend your knees. And
but not wanting to anymore doesn't work in a system where you don't get to say when you're done.
That's right.
Yes,
that's
the
true.
British system didn't exactly give them choices.
Yeah.
Right.
Was there any magical healing?
Yes. Yes, a shaper can heal.
Okay.
So the shapers are all in England, are all required to take medical training. So because you're not born knowing how to heal. You're born, well, not born with anything, but when you manifest your talent, it is pure biokinesis. You can shape the body. You can break somebody's bones. You can make their skin fall off. You can, heal a wound, but maybe you don't do it right. And so they have to have medical training, so they understand the body enough that they can do healing. And it hurts when you're healed if it's a major wound. And it's but it is magical healing, and it's mostly available to the wealthy. But they also send shapers into battle. I mean, not into battle, but they send them to the front to be medics. as well. So
That's one
So
of the
you took a
things.
shaper that was from a completely different continent and a
right.
completely different background as to how she used it, which I love
Right. Hmm.
because you see the shapers in England in some of the earlier books, but when you get to Whispering Twilight and then Liberating Light, this is a shaper who is coming from a completely different background and uses it in ways that some of the nice people in England go, "Oh, you're scary."
Hmm.
And that was really fun too because it was a contrast of it's the same power, but the background of how they were taught, how they learned to use it was different enough that you could see completely different angles on how the power was used and how it was accepted. So that was a fun place where you pulled through some stuff so we could see the
Yeah.
contrast.
Yeah. And that was one of my favorite ordinary versus extraordinary powers is that a shaper who's not an extraordinary can only shape their own body. And in England, that means they make themselves beautiful and strong.
Yep.
And they are vain, and that's pretty much what they do. And so it's the extraordinary shapers who are capable of turning their talent on someone else, meaning that they can heal them, um, have a different attitude. So in England, you've got two different two different like talents effectively, because they don't think the same way. And then, like Jana says, we bring in Amaya, who is from a completely different culture, and her talent is she views it very differently. So even though she's got the same raw ability, she doesn't think in those terms. And that was kind of fun too.
Yeah,
Now,
she's a little scary.
Yeah.
well, one of the things you see is everyone, and I'm not saying you did that, but a lot of
Mhm.
authors will do when they world build. If one person has this trait, all of them do. So, like,
Right.
all of them are afraid of the dark, or all of them. Whereas you're describing it as cultural and not an automatic.
That's
Because
right.
that's why
Mhm.
you get people with this power in other places. And I like that you draw the distinction.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, that sounds definitely interesting. Any other questions, Deanna?
I do have one other, since we were just talking about, all the research that you did. Was there anything that you researched and you went, this would be so cool, but then never found a place where it could go in the series? That something you wanted to use, but it just didn't work?
Let me think. Okay, I know that's true. Um, well, some of the American history, I wanted to deal with the Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee, um, and I just couldn't make it fit because I was in upstate. I lived in upstate New York when I was, well, you know how like you learn about your state history at some point in your elementary education, and whatever that was, I was in upstate New York for it, and so we talk a lot about the Iroquois, and I just thought they were the most fascinating thing, and really wanted to fit them in. So I did a lot of research on their culture and the way their government works, and I just could not make it fit. Uh, that was a regret for me. There were quite a few little details that I wanted to include that would just have been me showing off, and so I I kind of avoided that. Um, things like, well, okay, like dealing with the lost tribe of Incas in book 4, where I was doing all this research on Peru and Incan history and the history of the conquistadors. And so there was a lot of information that did not make it into the book, mainly because the way I'd set it up, this was 300 years after the conquistadors came to Peru. And so all that's left is what they remember. And so some of it comes, some of the information comes from another character who talks about, well, here's what the Incas were like, and this is why I'm justified in destroying them. And then the other side of, well, this is what the Incas are like, and this is why their society is beautiful and deserves not to be destroyed. And so there were quite a few details that did not make it into book 4 that I just was really interested in the history of how the Incas interacted with the first Europeans who came, and so some of it did, some of it didn't, but yeah, mostly it was the Iroquois. They that was one I really wanted to do, but ended up not being able to include.
Okay. Anything else for you, Jana? We're giving you your chance to open her mind.
Well, since we're at an hour 30, I will have to ponder on questions to ask again another time. But I have had a lot of good questions answered, and I will comment just a story on Melissa and this first cover for Burning Bright. I have watched that cover draw people from all the way across the room at a live event, where she'll have everything all set out, and I have seen people look up and catch this cover and beeline over to her table in order to find out what this cover was, with this, this beautiful dress and the fire and all of those kinds of things. And that was even in the early days before the rest of the books were done. And it was like, yeah, this has hit something that draws people in, and then they just love the series. So I'm excited to get more people must read it, so then I can talk to them about it.
Yeah, and let me just say again, this cover artist, she was just starting out when she did the cover for Burning Bright, and I was really glad to get in on the ground level for that, because she's very talented, and now she commands a much higher price for covers, and so totally worth paying. She and it's true, we've seen people drawn by this one particular. And so yay for good cover artists.
All right.
And here, I'll give you a leading question, Melissa. Where can they get these books, including the nice book bundles that I know that you're selling somewhere, so you can get them out of my basement? Where can they find them? How can they make this happen?
Well, it's funny you should ask, Jana. That's a very good question. I have all of these are available, of course, on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble for the Nook, and for Kobo, and for Apple, and all these other retailers. They're all available wide. However, I also have a store where you can buy things from me directly, and that is nightharborpress.com. Gosh, I hope I got that right.
You did?
Yes. Good. Yay. I remembered right. Yeah. Okay. So yes, you can go to Night Harbor Press, and you can buy the print books or the ebooks. The ebooks are delivered via Book Funnel, and when you do it, speaking of owning books, you own that book. You are not buying a license. You own that book. And so for ebooks, you can do that. Yeah. So there you go.
Yep. And she has a deal on bundling the first 3 in the series, just in case anybody wants to dip their toes in and get in beautiful paperback. There might be a deal going on. Yeah. Just maybe.
Now, do you keep signed copies in stock, given that you're so far away, you can't obviously easily sign and mail?
Yeah, I try to sign everything that's in Jana's basement before I go.
There's always a day that is a signing party.
Okay.
Is there pizza involved? Because everything is better with pizza.
No, Jana doesn't like pizza.
I don't eat pizza.
Nope.
I miscarried after having eaten like 4 slices of pizza and threw up all the way from St. George to Riverton, which is usually about a 3.5-hour trip, and ended up being almost an 8-hour trip, because my husband had to stop every 10 minutes so that I could throw up on the side of the road some more. And that was, 14 years ago now, and I can't do it. I can't.
That'd do it for me.
I can eat flatbread. Flatbread with butter on it and things like that, but the combination of traditional pizza flavors it's just not a thing I can do anymore ever again, and that's okay.
All right. So, Melissa, where can we find you on the wild interwebs?
Well, in addition to my website, the storefront, my website is melissamcshanewrites.com. You can find me there. You can find me on follow me on Amazon as an author, and I am on Facebook. I am on Twitter as M McShane Writes, and you can follow me as Melissa McShane on Goodreads, where I'm reviewing the books that I read for the project I referred to earlier.
Nice. All right. And as usual, those will be linked in the show notes, dear listener. And Jana, our extraordinary guest host, where can we find you?
Oh, well, I'm not hard to find if you look around. I'm on Melissa's Discord server as a, someplace to come over there and chat. She didn't mention that one, but we should totally put it in the show notes.
Yeah,
because the Discord server is very cool. But I can be found at opalkingdompress.com, where I actually have an open call for a anthology about phoenixes. So if our listeners out there also want to dabble in the whole writing side, that doesn't close until May 1st. So I believe that this will air before then. And then you can find me on Amazon, on all over the interwebs as Jana S. Brown, Jana S. Brown Writes, Jana Ray Author, or other things that we're not going to talk about on this podcast.
All right. And this is the part, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books. So do your part, people. Review it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads. Make your own website, review it there. Get a placard and put it in front of your house. Whatever you got to do, share the word of these good books. And it really does make a difference. And you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, which is linktr.ee Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We have our website, our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans from Madam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email. She doesn't get nearly enough email over there, so go send her a note, bug her, tell her to stab something or someone, whatever you got to do. Just send her a message so she knows you're alive. You could support the show over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till it pours out of their eyeballs, people. You don't want that, so or you do. Buy more coffee, whatever you got to do. It's gourmet, it's good. It's brewed, it's roasted in the U.S. It is not a drop shipping operation. It is actually made by the Coffee Brand Coffee Company, employing local Americans. And now they do ship wide, so check it out. It's got really good hot chocolate. Jana swears by it. Or is it hot cocoa? Is there a difference? I don't know.
Yes.
It's hot chocolate. It actually has little pieces of chocolate in it, and it's all delicious and beautiful. And there's a caramel version and a peppermint version that are both excellent.
Nice. Now I want some hot chocolate. All right. Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thank you for coming on and guest hosting, Jana. Thank you for coming on, Melissa.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It was fun. That was really great.
It was. And with that, we're going to hit the end.